Let's talk about the economic downturn. You played a major role in trying to roll this back. President Obama is being sharply criticized for his handling of the economy now. We had a recent disappointing jobs report, a slight uptick in unemployment. And as former chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, you were in the thick of responding to this crisis. You came up with this financial overhaul. How would you assess President Obama's handling of the crisis, the stimulus that he did propose, his attempt to create jobs, which is coming under fire now by Republicans?
The Obama program, supported by Democrats in Congress, has made a bad situation better than it otherwise would have been. Because of Republican successful obstruction, it hasn't been as successful as it could have been. As to the financial reform bill, which I worked on, by the way, that was never intended to be a short-term stimulus to the economy. That is a protection against another set of circumstances leading to the crash. The economic stimulus that the president proposed in 2009 wasn't enough, but it was reduced by the Republicans. Again, go back to the filibuster. We needed 60 Republican votes. 3 Republican senators said, we're not voting for this unless you reduce it. And we needed 2 of them, but they said the 3 were going to vote together. So they reduced the stimulus. I thought it was too small, but it was smaller even than it would have been because the Republicans cut it back. Republican policies have been starving the public sector. They have been cutting back, particularly since they took power in the House, on funds that would go to state and local governments. If the state and local government payroll, teachers, firefighters, public works employees, police officers, if that had stayed even, unemployment would now be under 8%. Over 600,000 jobs have been lost from people who did public service. So the job creation in the private sector has been better than it would look if you just look at the overall number, because about 15% of the jobs created in the private sector have been lost in the public sector. Exactly the opposite of the Republican argument that the public sector is growing and smothering the private sector. It's the other way around. The economy has not done as well as it could have because of the Republicans misprescribing it and saying, let's cut back on spending. Although ironically, my Republican colleagues, in one of the great acts of intellectual dishonesty and hypocrisy, are now trying to block any cuts in the military on the grounds that when the government stops spending on the military, it's bad for the economy. According to them, if the government spends to hire police officers or build highways, it's irrelevant to the economy. But if we maintain a base in Australia, it's good for the economy. I don't think that really makes sense. The other problem we have, of course, is what's going on in Europe. We have consistently done better than our European counterparts, partly because they've been following austerity while we have been doing a more stimulative one, although not as much as we would like. I think Paul Krugman has made this case eloquently and consistently and irrefutably. Most recently, we were back for 3 years in a row now, things were going well in America, and then Europe stalls. I mean, we have got the best performing developed economy, but it's held back by what's going on in Europe.
Well, that leads me to suggest, what you very well know, that the debate in the EU right now, this austerity versus growth, echoes what we've been talking about here, the Democrats promoting a bit more stimulus, not necessarily against cuts, but saying, we need both, we need a more balanced approach. That cutting the budget and not opposing any revenue increases is simply not the right formula. What is the right formula in your view?
Well, it's a matter of timing, and by the way, it's true. Europe was much in the austerity side. The fact that America was doing noticeably better than Europe with similar types of economies, where we were following more of a stimulative and less austerity, although not as much as I would have liked, I think it's helping shift the balance in Europe. And as you know, the arguments are shifting in Europe, partly because people are realizing that in democracy you can't jam some things down the public's throat, but also because of the economic impact. England is doing austerity not because the EU or the IMF has forced them to, but as a matter of conservative ideology, and it's not working well for their economy. But the answer is, and Ben Bernanke says this, George Bush's chief economic appointee, short-term stimulus within the context of a longer-term deficit reduction. We should have been spending more this last year or so, but voting to reduce it further out. And the Republicans have been insisting on short-term cuts as well as long-term cuts, and that, of course, is, I believe, a great mistake. My own view is that there's substantial room, for example, for military spending reductions, to scale America back to a reasonable level. I believe that, for instance, Europe and the Mediterranean, we could basically leave from the defense standpoint to the Europeans. They are no longer the weak and poor nations threatened by Stalin that they were when we started NATO and started these things. I'd like to keep NATO as an equal partnership, not an American subsidy to our European allies. We maintain a stock of weapons sufficient to defeat the Soviet Union in an all-out nuclear war, the likelihood of which I think has declined significantly enough so we could cut back on that. And we could tax wealthy people. When Bill Clinton was president, he asked us to raise taxes on the top bracket. We did it. It had zero negative economic effect. The economy in the years after that was raised were very good. So a combination of more taxation on the wealthy, spending constraints in general, but significant restraints on reduction in military spending, that brings the economy, that brings the deficit down over the long term. But short term, we should be pumping more money into states and cities. They should be hiring more people to provide necessary public service and also help the economy. And we should be building highways and doing a few other things that are the kind of public service everybody's for.